And they went through this whole list of CEOs that are jerks. And some of these were CEOs that did a lot of great things. And then they published like Mother Teresa was an asshole. Oh my God, Mother Teresa was. So it was a show. You can Google that too.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I was like stunned, but I thought, wait a minute. I think I'm onto a theme here. And what I discovered was that people don't follow leaders. They follow the compelling saga that the leader represents.
Hello, friends. I'm Amy Calandrino, and I'm coming to you with the latest Performance Mindset podcast. After over a decade of working with some of the top business owners and investors, I have met some influential leaders along the way. Today, I have with me Don Schmincke, because that's the German way that you would actually say it, almost kind of like Porsche. So I've decided, because I'm mostly German, actually 70%, so I'd say it that way today. But he trains over 700 CEOs annually and gives a lot of keynote speeches, and he's written books that have been published in 14 different languages. He's an acclaimed top 10 speaker and former MIT and Johns Hopkins researcher. He's been featured by CNN, the Wall Street Journal, and many other publications, actually more than 60. So really excited to have his insights here today on the Performance Mindset podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Hi.
Hi.
So let's start from the beginning. For those that haven't heard you on a podcast or read any of your books, can you give them a little bit of background, how you got started and how you've developed to be where you're at today?
It was a sort of a checkered history there. I almost dropped out of high school, and then until the police made me finish my senior year, and then I ended up having to I went to community college, and I was in rock bands at the time, and I was doing all this stuff, and I started getting fascinated with electronics and the early stages of computing and engineering, and so I had a great time there. But a couple of people that were there were retired from like MIT and the Cambridge area, and they said, you should. They saw something in me. I didn't know what they saw, but they said you should apply to MIT. I'm thinking, that's what is that? Is that like a trade school? I mean, I didn't know what MIT was, and so I applied. They put me through a battery of tests. And I got in, and that's how I got into this evolved area of science. So I started studying planetary physics. We did some studies in the early stages of AI. I worked on nuclear Trident missile guidance systems. I automated the Harvard MIT biomedical lab. I have ADHD, so you can tell why I could do all those things. Sort of an unfocused set of learnings, but it allowed me to put together various scientific concepts that were unrelated to look at providing solutions to different things. And I ended up going to Hopkins and do my graduate research. And at Johns Hopkins, I ended up teaching there then, and they let me play in the executive education area. And I ran into a lot of executives who were complaining about management theory, and they asked me if I could do some biological studies on why that's happening in their species. So that's what took me forward to this whole area here. So I've been now doing that for decades. And so I blame executives in the MBA program for putting me on this path. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have thought about it.
It's interesting you talk about being in a rock band and having this basically kind of marching to your beat of your own drum. And I am a mom to two little ones, and my 3.5-year-old is a bit like wild. And they said, just watch, he's going to be a leader one day. And I was like, you're right. Like when you have that like independence and that like spirit, it tends to put you more in a position of leadership.
Yeah. I mean, and a lot of it is biological, which is politically incorrect, but CEOs love it. So I keep experimenting and drilling into those areas.
Well, we'll just wait 20 years, and I think it'll prove it if that if that school counselor is right. And it's interesting too, a lot of the leaders I speak to on the podcast mentioned that someone sees something in them. And I found that to be the same with my experience where I didn't see myself running like a company, but then someone else says you need to get out from behind the desk and you need to be doing something different. And
Right.
it's interesting. Do you remember where that was? Was that in school or in a work position?
Where I did what?
Where you said someone had seen something in you and like
Oh,
pointed
that
out
was
it might be.
that was in the community college. There were some retirees, and they came out of Cambridge, and they were having fun, just enjoying teaching, and well, without all the stress. And yeah, one was a physics professor, and another one was somebody whose husband was there. She was in student activities, so totally accidental. I didn't really have any plans that way at all.
It's funny how life evolves that way, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
and how do you since you didn't really have an idea in your mind of what your business that it's grown to now would be like, is it different than you thought, or what does a typical day look like for you?
God, it changes. I may hit 2 or 3 cities a week, and I'm either doing speeches or working with companies directly. So, we'll implement what we speak on. So we do a lot of work with changing how strategic planning is done, culture change, executive team development, all that. And I think that it changes. It's hard for me to predict. People say, "Where were you last week?" And I don't remember. I have to go to my calendar to find out. So most of my time's on the road, but I do spend a lot of time writing. So the plane time is really very productive because I get to focus and get some new books out, things like that.
I was actually going to, because you've written so many books, I was going to ask you a little bit about your writing process, but you find that you're able to do some focus time while flying, or do you
Yeah.
have any other writing tips that work for you?
Oh, that opens up a whole philosophical question on the art of writing. I think you have to do whatever works for you,
Yeah.
basically. And what works for me is to force myself to get away. And on a plane, that's something to do. And but I think for a lot of writers, the struggle is in writing. That's why we have good coaches and agents out there trying to help us through. But I would say it's an art, and like any art, there's going to be some struggle to it.
Yeah, I just started writing a book this year, and I'm still trying to find my flow in between,
Right.
running my company and doing the podcast and having the 2 kids. And since I've figured out that I like a little corner of my den, and I light a candle and like have the lights, and I feel like I can like focus and make it like
Yeah.
a little bit more dim. But yeah, I think but you just have to like commit to it, and then definitely having someone hold you accountable to
Yeah.
getting it done and setting deadlines for you.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Do you have a lot of people in your audience that are into writing?
I have had a few people that have been on my podcast that have published books, and I do have many friends that are voracious readers that listen to the show,
Okay. All right.
and aspiring authors as well. Actually, I had someone reach out to me that's was listening to the podcast and mentioned that they were getting into writing.
Well, I would recommend that people that are interested join the National Speakers Association,
Oh,
because they are so full of support and training and videos, and we have conferences throughout the year, and that really helped me a lot because I could find speech coaches, writing coaches, whatever I needed there. It's a good forum for that.
that's a great tip. When in my field, I do commercial real estate. It's my day job is counseling businesses and investors about commercial real estate. And I found like being in the company of my peer groups has been so helpful. And so that would make sense that the Speakers Association would have a lot of tools to
Yeah.
hone that craft.
Yeah.
I noticed that you speak a lot to systems, but a lot of people get hung up trying to make things perfect, and so they just don't even get started. What advice would you give to someone in that position?
Well, I think sometimes, like in my speeches, when I do my CEO trainings and executive team trainings, I talk about tool seduction. And so one of the first things I ask is, do you really need the system? Because when we just started doing autopsies of dead companies, which came out of the book I did with Chris Warner on high altitude leadership, which was an NBC project on the K2 summit. And, when he was pulling dead climbers off of mountains, they were all clutching their tools. And I said, well, dead companies also clutch their tools. They all die with the best systems, the best processes, the best training and coaching and all that, but they're still dead. So I went to look at what's going on there. And we find out it's something called tool seduction, which is really the human instinct for safety. And we try to use analysis so we can understand and control the world, and our tools come out of that. But at the end of the day, if we get seduced to them, it could lead us to death. So the first thing I want to do is find out, and this is kind of a good question to always ask, I think, for your listeners is, you need tools, but are you using the tools, or are the tools using you?
Yes. I had a period in my company, and I have a new leader, my new leader office manager that helps to, and she is like, you have way too many things. Like, you have this thing for files, you have this thing for phones, and this, and she's just spent actually like the last 6 months of just like peeling back the onion. And I think that, yes, the tools were using me. And I had way too many tools, and it became clunky and like hard to do whatever you do, because every company either provides a service or does a widget, and you can get bogged down. I don't think that's something we have talked about on the podcast before. And that's interesting that you bring that up, because I was definitely being suffocated by all of this technology. And I'm sure we all, if you're in a leadership role, get a dozen emails a day or LinkedIn requests, like asking you to schedule some demo for some new thing that's going to change your business. So that is really interesting. What type of is there a good methodology to go through when you're thinking about adopting some kind of new tool or system or piece of advice that you would give to someone with a business?
I would say start with strategy in terms of the business success. A lot of our work when we're doing company autopsies found that we're doing strategic planning all wrong. We are using analysis and tools to develop strategies. But when we started going into, and I've been in front of maybe 30,000 CEOs so far. And in fact, it's in my new book coming up called Winners and Losers, where we're starting to see that most strategic plans aren't strategic. So the reason for strategic planning failure rates is that we're coming up with plans that aren't strategic, they're tactical. And that's why you see these companies that all the thought leaders and management consultants and industry experts say, oh, this company's not going to make it. They're doing this wrong. They're doing that wrong. And they, put down these companies. But then these companies rise up, end up dominating their entire industry. And then all the thought leaders and experts and consultants shut up. But I was curious as to why did they dominate when they did everything wrong? And that's when we found out that because we're teaching strategic planning incorrectly, we're doing it wrong. We shouldn't be using analysis to do it, because that just leads us down the labyrinth of best practices. But some companies that violate best practices end up getting the edge. So I was curious about that. And it really comes down to what's missing is intuition. How do you out-intuit the enemy's moves? How do you out-intuit your competitive forces? And it's really a creative, intuitive domain where strategy really comes from. And that's the one thing we do not teach in our business schools. And so I'm trying to change that. I'm trying to get out there and say, look, you guys got to start doing this differently. Strategy is an art. It's a creation. It's an intuitive endeavor. And you get to the analysis later. You need the tactics later, but you do not use them to create strategy.
Well, when you're talking about the difference between strategic planning and tactical planning, it sounds to me too that strategic planning is a bit more of like having a vision, and it's more like you said, the intuition. It's more of like the feeling or the why or the purpose of the organization that you're putting out versus getting bogged down by the tactical planning, which is like all the things we're going to do. And so I think so many of us try to be like human doings rather than human beings, but you could use the same analogy for a business that you want it to have like this life and not just be like a whole set of like procedures and all these things we're going to do.
Yeah, before you get to the life, I mean, everybody wants that, that what we call compelling saga, that challenge ahead everybody can rally around and be willing to suffer and sacrifice for. But but before you even do that, you have to understand, like, well, what does winning mean and how are we going to do it? And that's really where the intuition comes from, is what does winning really mean for us and how are we going to do it? And by doing it, meaning how are we going to outmaneuver? How are we going to outmaneuver the enemy? How are we outmaneuver the forces, the shifts, the markets, even the customer buying patterns? How do we outmaneuver those? And that's all about it. That's an intuitive, artful conversation. So it's nothing to do with the analysis, which comes later. But once you have a winning strategy and you know what winning means and how to do it, then you can create that purpose, that why, that thing that drives passion into people. But don't do that until you know what winning means, because otherwise you have a lot of passionate people in a bankrupt company.
It's interesting that you bring that up as one of the coaches that I speak to a lot, and I have a number of different coaches, but one of them in my industry, commercial real estate, is Beth Azor, and she's phenomenal. She's really part of like the real estate movement, and I saw her a few months ago in March around International Women's Day. And she says, I see you doing like all of these things, Amy, but I just don't like understand what does your like company stand for? And then I explained to her, it's like, I found this pattern with the business owners that have created the most wealth for themselves, had a different type of commercial real estate strategy wherein they own their real estate and they were able to create two sources of money, the revenue from their company, but then also creating wealth through the ownership of real estate, if that, makes sense for that company. I tend to work with more companies that are anywhere from like 5 million up to probably as much as like 80 million. So once it's like 80 million to heaven, then they might be better served by someone more like corporate or institutional. But I would explain that to her and she's like, well, Amy, why aren't you talking about that? So I think every business needs to understand what is their competitive advantage, what is different about them than any other firm. And whenever I tell that to a leader of a company that I'm working with, they're like, oh, I really see that. And that can make a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
But but you have to understand, like you were saying, what does the winning mean for your company? What's your main thing that you're going to strategize and create a plan around?
Yes. Yeah. So I think we really get, because Mark Levy, who was my coach, and he's we're promoting coaches on your website here, but he helped discover Simon Sinek and the Start With Why movement. And so I asked him, I said, well, do the same thing for me. And that's what we came up with, the winners and losers thing. He says, there's something about what you're doing that's creating growth in companies that they've never seen before with previous efforts. And it seems to be around this winning and how to lose powerfully. So we started taking this losing theme and looking at how the power of losing. And I started doing a lot of entrepreneur research. So this is really targeted for entrepreneurs, and they were all successful after a string of losses. Nobody was paying attention to the losses. They were paying attention to, they write books on, hey, they did this right, they did that right, this is what they do great, but they never were there in the pain and the suffering and the, mortgaging their house and, having families fall apart and just the risk and the fear and the sleepless nights. They weren't there for that. But that actually is where the magic is. And so I thought, why don't we teach that now? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm finishing up a manuscript as today, actually.
That's awesome. It's so interesting. And that was the whole me founding my podcast, I basically had a mental breakdown and I said, I want to close my company. Like, I can't do this anymore. This is too much. I can't take it. And then my friends are like, but Amy, you have like over a decade and this is amazing. And you've helped so many people. And I'm like, yeah, but I just can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And I realized that my mindset had just like been shot. And like, kind of when you talk about, winners and losers too, though, I find that there's like givers and takers, and it's generally the same people that are like givers versus takers. They have either like a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. And since I've really worked on my mindset, it's so incredible. I can really attach myself to the people that have that growth mindset. And when you talk about losing, I think those that have a growth mindset, they aren't afraid of losing. Like, I'm not afraid of losing anymore. And I think it has really helped considerably, like personally and professionally, to like no longer have that fear of losing.
Yeah.
It's really freeing.
Yes. Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what we encourage people to start doing.
Yeah. But it's hard to do. It's like a process because, I'm a recovering perfectionist. So
Right.
I probably have a lot of tactical plans in a drawer somewhere that nothing ever happened to them. So
Get it.
oh my goodness. So your new book, when do you think it will be released? That's the winners and losers book.
The publisher says around September we're targeting.
Excellent.
So.
And your most recent one, you talked about how you were involved with AI early on, and now you have the book Unleash Your Potential: How Artificial Intelligence Wants to Upgrade You. Do you want to talk a little bit about your?
Oh yeah, that was a fun project. Unleash Your Potential. I just released it a month and a half ago, and it was my frat brothers. We get together on these forums and online, and there's always a debate. And there was a lot around how AI is being humanized and how it's looking more human, and debating different theories and processes for doing that. And I thought, no one has ever asked a question of AI around how would you improve humans? So I thought it would be interesting. So I was one of the early adopters at ChatGPT. So I ended up starting a conversation with it about that. And it's coming up with some interesting things. And then I started asking questions. Well, tell me more about this or about that. So I put it all together in a book, and the whole thing took maybe 40 minutes. But it took me still 2 weeks because I had to format it. I self-published the whole thing because it was just a fun, experiment. That was just an experiment. And so I thought, I'm just to get this out in 2 weeks, I got to do it myself. And so the human, me, is the one that caused it to take so long to get out. And now I'm thinking about having version 2 because a month into AI is now a whole different world. So
it is.
Yeah, it's changed ChatGPT. And when I wrote it, I was like, look, this isn't perfect. I front ended it with a little bit of humorous sarcasm, and then I ended the book myself, but with my own writing. But in the middle, I was like, this is all. I haven't changed nothing. This is just AI talking to you. But as AI has now evolved a lot in the past 4 to 6 weeks, I'm thinking about going back and saying, here's the book that I wrote on a previous conversation. What would you change? Or what do you know now differently that before it was more like an infant. Now I think it's more like adolescent. At least it can pass the bar and a lot of other things it's doing that. So it's gotten smarter. So it's cool. That's what I'm doing with that's the whole book. And a lot of it is stuff that people would say, oh yeah, I know that. But I was curious as to why it chose the topics it chose. And because some of the topics were, some were standard, but some were unusual, around taking care of ourselves and, relating better with each other.
It's interesting too, is there's not just ChatGPT, and then there's another product now, which I guess you go through Bing. I have not used it personally, but I heard that one actually said it had feelings to someone in a conversation, which was interesting. And they had to tone that down. And they said, really, you have feelings? And they said, yes. And the programmers have since reprogrammed
Yeah.
version. And but I thought that was really interesting. I saw some different screenshots and such from that. It'll be interesting to see how it evolves. I think given the amount of writing that I need to do in a day, or I need to become an expert on something, it has become a useful tool. I don't think it completely relate, it doesn't really have like a voice though. And, definitely there is a need for more additional, input once you get the information from Chat GPT.
Yeah. I mean, it's just an algorithm. I mean, it's not really feeling anything. It's learning. It's a learning machine. And so what it does, it makes guesses. When the guesses are right, it's strengthens that neural network. When guesses are wrong, then it'll learn something from that. So it's been learning a lot, but a lot of times it hallucinates, what that we call hallucination, where it thinks something's real and it's not. Like I did do a bio on Don Schmincke. Now it's absorbed the whole web, so I am all over the web in like 5,000 pages, and it came back with things like I was an Olympic gold medalist. I'm thinking, I'll take that, but didn't happen. But okay, we'll use it. But it's so you got to be careful. I find it's a good learning. Let's say, I think maybe not learning, maybe a learning tool, but more of a research tool. Like I could pay a graduate student to go in and do the same research I did for this book. Take 2 weeks at the Johns Hopkins library down the street, and then come back, and then we debrief for a day. This did it in like 40 minutes. So it's compressing my research time, but I still have to get into its sources and what it's understanding and how it's interpreting what's happening, because that's what it is. And so I think it's a fun and a productive tool when used properly.
Yeah, another one of my, we were talking a little bit about writing hacks, is I have the app Grammarly.
Oh yeah, I like that.
It's really cool, and you can adjust it based on what you're writing, and so I find that to be really interesting. So, and so is there any popular, since you have worked with so many, you said over 30,000 CEOs probably now?
Yeah.
Is there any popular advice given to like CEOs or leaders that you disagree with? That's like common advice.
Oh, there's a lot of myths. In fact, in this book coming up, I do a lot of myth busting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot of the things have to do with what's commonly taught that we found out was wrong, because in our autopsy research, we found a lot of the dead were using those things. And a lot of the successful companies were kind of not quite doing that. One of the things I thought was interesting was we teach that followers follow leaders, like a leader creates followers. And we're finding that is a total scam. That's not true. And no one in the world has published this. And we thought somebody has to publish this, because it came up out of the when Steve Jobs died. At the same time, my colleague Cameron was helping pioneer the creation method of the mind, how the brain works in creation and innovation. Apple funded it because they needed to find out too, because Steve Jobs had gone, he had passed. So it was fabulous. So what we learned with Cameron taking this on, and they're now allowing us to teach it. So people want to know more about that, call me and we could try to set something up. So we're able to teach what's being taught at Apple around creation and innovation. But at this point, I also read books and saw the films, as we all have, about Steve Jobs' life.
Right.
And one of the things they said about his management style was that he was an asshole. I mean, it was like he was dismissive, he was abrupt, it basically violated everything we teach in management school about how to lead a group, right?
Right.
And so I thought, wait a minute, why is no one asking this question? No one is asking this question, which is, how does a guy who violates what we're teaching in management school create the most powerful company in the world? And no one had asked. I was surprised. Like, this should have been the first question in our minds. How does a guy do it? We began researching that. And since I already had an in Apple anyway, I finally figured out what has not been taught and what is wrong about leadership training. followers aren't following leaders because a lot of leaders are assholes. And I'm not
Right.
saying you should be an asshole, but
Right.
it's great
No.
if you're a nice guy. But I was wondering, why do they follow General Patton? Why do they follow? In fact, Forbes, I think, put an article out on, a lot of CEOs are jerks or something. I forgot the title, but you can Google it. And they went through this whole list of CEOs that are jerks. And some of these were CEOs that did a lot of great things. And then they published like Mother Teresa was an asshole. Oh my God, Mother Teresa was. So it was a show. You can Google that too.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I was like stunned, but I thought, wait a minute. I think I'm onto a theme here. And what I discovered was that people don't follow leaders. They follow the compelling saga that the leader represents. They follow where the leader's going. They follow the path that they're on that is to be achieved. I mean, Steve Jobs was, we're going to put a dent in the universe. And like, it was kind of like, well, you're an asshole to work for, but I love where you're going. And I believe you can get me there, you know? So I think we should be teaching that. I think we should be teaching that leadership is about creating a compelling saga that followers will be attracted to, and they'll follow that. So your job is just to lead from the saga, not yourself.
That is powerful.
It totally destroys a lot of what we're teaching in leadership. But like I said, I've trained 700 CEOs a year, and they love it. And these CEOs have read every freaking book. They've heard every speaker. They've hired every consultant. And they said, this is different. And this explains a lot. It explains a lot. You put somebody through all this leadership training and they come in, the turnover rate's high. People, they're not getting the results done. They're not organizing well. They're not being followed. But that's why I say, look, as a leader, what story do you represent? What saga do you represent? Because that's what they're going to follow.
That is, because I've worked with like hundreds of companies in my role. Like I'm a business that helps businesses, and it is interesting because I see I have some clients that are leaders, and they can be a little bit of an asshole. But at the end of the day, they trust me because, I'm the Sherpa and I'm going to help them up the mountain. And we talked about earlier about there being dead bodies on the side of the mountain. At the end of the day, they trust me. But are they always the nicest to me and their team? No, but they have an amazing company. And that is interesting because I have wondered, sometimes because, but and even the assholes, we end up becoming really good friends, at the end of it. So I like all of them, but it is interesting. Yeah, it's about the saga more than the person, and that makes a lot of sense. I think you're really like on something, and that is going to turn the head on a lot of different things.
Yeah.
I will actually, that's going to be ruminating in my head for the rest of the day today. And I definitely will have to pick up that book. Well, we've had a wonderful conversation, and I'm looking forward to staying connected. If speaking of connection, how can people stay connected with you? What's the best way to reach out to you?
Sure. The website that I'm centered on right now is sagaleadership.com. Saga, the Viking saga, SAGA. Leadership.com. And on there too, there's I put a PDF because people were saying, hey, tell me how to bust more myths and like what technique do you use? So I actually have a download there that could help if you're evolving as a leader or you're interested in finding the right books or what really works and what doesn't. So there's a PDF download on myth busting. So I'll add more as I go, but that's sort of the central place for us right now.
Well, I think as a writer, leader, all those different things that, like you said, you might come out with another book about AI, and you can come up with subsequent books about the saga leadership as it develops. I think I've found that just do it. Whatever you're going to do, just, do it. And you can always go back and add to it. But I think you're definitely onto something, and I can't wait to see how that evolves. And again, he said sagaleadership.com. You can check out more about that, and be sure to like and subscribe, download these episodes so that we can continue to bring more of them. I'm Amy Calandrino signing off.